Awesome. No, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, and we will talk soon. Okay, bye. Sorry about that, but thanks for being here. I've got some great news. I was just talking to my friend who's a TV producer, and they asked me if I knew anyone who could make a quick opening title sequence for a new show called The Awesome Show. Apparently it's a show about things that are awesome. Anyway, I volunteered you to animate it, so that's going to be your homework for today. And amazingly, their logo is a script font, and they want it to be animated writing itself on screen.
That's weird.
What an amazing coincidence, right? Let's check it out in After Effects and I'll explain everything. Okay, so here we are in the project, and I totally love this. The producer of the show told me that the vibe is extra, right? And you can definitely see that here. Now, one thing that I want to mention up top is that I have this logo build comp, and let's just jump in here for a sec, all right? So if you look here, you can see that I have 6 different versions of the logo, 2 easy, 2 medium, and 2 hard, okay? And 2 different kind of backgrounds for the logo that display the words the and show, okay? So there are basically 12 different combinations here. Oh, and I should mention that these logos were designed for us by my friend Todd Goldstein, who many years ago was my student and then later went on to work at Pentagram and many other pretty serious branding studios. So let's check these out a little closer. So the easier ones in general have less connection points between the letters. Okay, so if we look at this one right here, we see that this is kind of like A and W and E and S and OME and then the exclamation point, right? So, and if we look at the other easy one, it's kind of similar. Like the A is a little bit separate, probably. The W is on its own. The E and the S are one thing. The O is probably separate, and the M and the E are one thing, and the exclamation point is separate, okay? So that's definitely one mark of the easier ones, that they have less connections. The other thing is that they have more consistently thick or thin stroke lines, okay? Because that makes it a little bit easier too. So if we look at the medium one, this one, medium one, this is actually the same one that I worked with when I did the word sweet in the lesson, okay? This is the gelato font that I mentioned. Now this one is more difficult because it is thicker and thinner, and you do have to account for that when you animate it, okay? But the A is separate, the W is separate, and then this is all one big piece here, so that's a little bit tricky, and then the exclamation point is separate, okay? So that's a medium one. Here's another medium one. Now this one has consistent stroke thickness, so in that way it's sort of easier, but all of it is completely connected, okay? Except for the exclamation point. So that's a little bit trickier there. Okay, and finally, let's look at these harder ones. Here's one here. And to some degree or other, this one has, definitely a variable stroke thickness, but it also just has some funky letters like this S. Like you'll definitely have to work to make that look and feel kind of normal. This is a little bit tricky here, and then this A has got this kind of extra glyph here. Now I totally love this font. I think it looks really cool. But it's definitely on the trickier side, okay? And then let's look at the final, more difficult one. Now this one, everything is connected, and it's fairly intricate and has some funky points as well here in the type, like this S serif. You'll definitely have to work that out somehow if you take this one on, okay? But again, I totally love this. I really do love all these fonts, so it's really up to you which one you want to work on. Now let me mention for one sec that we have these 2 different ways of displaying the and show, okay? This is like the secondary elements of the logo. So we have this one here, which is slightly more complex. We have this one here, which is slightly less complex, okay? Both of these are pre-comps, and in the pre-comp, for example, here, these are broken down into individual letters, and these are shape layers, so you have more animation possibilities, okay? So do what you want with these. This one here, if we look at it, it's got the same letters, but it also has these pre-comps with these lines in it, all right? So yeah, it's up to you to pick the logo that you want to work with or think you have enough time to accomplish. No matter what combination you go with, just so it's totally clear here, you have to write the words awesome on screen, making it look like it's being written by hand, okay? For the other parts of the logo, like the words that say the and show, it's really totally up to you how you want to animate those. The letters can kind of pop on one at a time, or move on, or scale on. It's really your choice. And that also goes for the little lines if you choose to animate the logo version with lines. So if you only have time to animate the logo, That's totally fine. This in and of itself is a very tricky, time-consuming thing to do, and I know you'll learn a lot doing that, all right? Just make sure to render it out so that your TA can see what you've done and give you pointers, right? If I were you, I would render it out from this main composition, and even if the other parts of this are not animated, just go ahead and render it from here. Now, if you do want to do more, you can definitely animate the elements in this main comp as well. Of course, you should definitely make sure to animate the word awesome first. Everybody has to do that, okay? But once you've done that, definitely feel free to animate the rest of this project, okay? So let's just go through this a little bit. I'm gonna turn off the logo here for 1 sec, though I do wanna point out that I put a drop shadow effect on the logo. You can definitely see it here. And it's kind of light. I thought it looked cool, but if you don't like it, you can always turn that off up here, right? I just thought it gave a little bit of separation from this kind of busy background image there, all right? So I'm gonna go ahead and turn the logos off just so we can talk about the rest of this. Now, we have a couple of graphic elements right on top. We've got these 2 bursts, okay, one here and one here. And feel free to do whatever you want with those. I was kind of thinking those would just be fun graphic elements. They can kind of pop on and off like flash bulbs, or pop on and do like a little bit of hold keyframe rotations or something just to stay like active, right? Totally up to you to decide what you want to do there. I've also got this kind of rounded rectangle thing here, which you can feel free to animate however you want, okay? And then we've got these combinations, which I've colored, by the way, pairs, okay? We've got matte and fill pairs. We've got these rectangles and then photos that are filled into those rectangles. So let me look at just this pair together, okay? This one's actually slightly unique because this rectangle is on, so the photo bouquet is being track matted into that rectangle, right? But this rectangle, instead of being off, it's on, okay? And this rectangle, as you can see here, is kind of a pink color. And that is using a blending mode, okay, which we haven't really talked about that much, but if you're a Photoshop person, you definitely know all about blending modes, okay? So this pink is being blended into this photo using multiply, okay? So there's a bunch of different blending modes in here, and these are all design things. I don't think I need to go over this right now, but you could change these to something like hard light and change the way this blending looks, okay? I'm gonna set that back to multiply. You should just know that this rectangle is on, okay? So in these rectangle and photo pairs, you could definitely change both elements, okay? So for example, the size of this rectangle could be made bigger. Now the one thing that I would caution you about is that the photo is only, this size. You could see the edge of the photo kind of right here and right here. So if you make this rounded rectangle too big, you will eventually reveal the edges of the photo underneath, and that will not look like what you want it to look like. So that's one word of caution. And of course, you can also animate the photo behind, the one that's matted into this rectangle. You could do whatever you want with it. Like, for example, make it bigger or smaller. You just don't want to see the edges of the artwork, okay? So that's that pair. Let me turn those off, and let's look at this pair here for 1 sec. This rectangle 2 and this, which is ice cream, okay? So again, the rectangle can be animated in a bunch of different ways, like the size, or the roundness, or any of these things, okay? So you basically have these pairs of rectangles and images that are filling in, right? So you got this one, and then you got this one here. And at the moment, this one's just like kind of hidden off because this is made like really small, but you can always kind of reveal this, like that there's puppies back there, by kind of, I don't know, animating this like this or whatever, right? So you can kind of reveal these different things that are in these boxes if you want to. And then finally, you just have this one, this sort of candy in the background, and this isn't actually matting into anything. And this is quite a big layer, so you could change the size on this. All the photos are quite big for that reason, all right? So there's that, and yeah, I think in a certain way, the easiest way to animate all of these elements, if you're just looking for something kind of simple, and definitely you want to remember that all of the elements in here are secondary to the logo, right? The main purpose of this is to tell us the name of the show. I mean, that's what an opening title is for, okay? So if the animation is so distracting that we can't even read this or we're not looking at this, that's not really a win, okay? So what you want is for all these other elements other than the logo to kind of be secondary animation elements, which I know we've talked about before, but they should kind of support the logo animation and not distract from it, okay? So what I was saying is possibly the easiest way to animate all this other stuff that's dynamic but still doesn't take too much attention away from the logo is just to kind of animate it all with a drift, like have everything be getting just a little bit bigger. So for example, like this, I'll turn this off. This rounded rectangle and this bouquet, right? Right now, both of these have their anchor point in the exact center of the composition, which is what we'd kind of want, right? So if I, Option S and made some scale keyframes for these, we could animate the scale of these two things, but at different rates, okay? And we could also use a little bit of parallax, which we've talked about before. Parallax is the idea that in 3D space, things that are closer to you appear to be moving faster. So, for example, we could think of like this as being closer to us than this, and this is being closer to us than this, and this is being closer to us than that, right? So the things in the foreground could kind of move more, and the things farther back could move less. That would give us a little bit of a sense of parallax, okay? Additionally, the rectangle, for example, here, and the bouquet, these could animate at different rates because they are different items as well. So that could give us a little bit of an illusion of depth as well. So for example, if the rectangle scaled to like, 105 or something not terribly big, but then the photo scaled like a whole bunch in the background, they would look like they were moving at different rates, okay? And that could be interesting. So yeah, so you could try that out. You could have everything, all of these items kind of drifting forward at different rates, which would be pretty sweet and definitely not be too distracting from the logo, all right? Another thing that's up to you is the length. The producer just said, make it good. So yeah, I'm guessing that you're gonna need something like 4 or 5 seconds to write on the word awesome, and maybe another second or so for the other elements like the and show. And then you definitely want to give the viewer 2 whole seconds after it's all done animating on to read it at a relaxed pace. If you're also animating the main comp, you might need some more time depending on what you want to do, so just do what you need to do in terms of length. However, I think it should be no longer than 10 seconds in total, otherwise everybody's going to be pressing that skip intro button. So now I want to pivot and talk about a few things that I think are going to help you do this. The first is that I definitely urge you to test and very clearly understand the way you want the word awesome to write on screen. This is a seriously crucial part of the process. At the very least, I think you're going to want to write it out in the air in front of you like 1,000 times until you see how you think it should be written. It's also helpful to write it out on paper with a pen and watch your own hand as you go. And finally, once you understand how it should work, I think it'd be really useful to make a diagram like this. In this diagram, what I did is I carefully wrote it out on paper and in the air in front of me until I realized that it should work like this, at least for me, okay? And I've indicated the order of the strokes, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and the pauses, okay? So here we go on the first one. I go up here and down there, and then here I pause just momentarily before making the W, okay? And here, and the second one is I stroke across, all right? The third stroke is I start here and go like this, and I pause right here and then do the rest of the S, okay? The fourth one rather is here, and I pause there, and and then pause here, and then go around and do the E loop, and then finally I do the exclamation point, okay? Those pauses are super important to making the animation feel like authentic handwriting. So I definitely want to go over this again in After Effects and just give you a few pointers on how to accomplish that. Okay, so I've got a situation here just like what I did in the lesson, okay? And right now I've got EET kind of tracked into this mat, and I've already drawn this mat out to cover the EET, right? And I've put some linear keyframes in here right now, okay? And this is what I want to talk about, is how to get this timing right, all right? I would definitely get the timings right and use linear keyframes before you do any of the masking, okay? This is actually really important. So first, just use linear keyframes and look at the mat to see if you think the timings are right. Now, this is actually not something that I did in the lesson. I had this turned off, and I was trying to look at things this way, which just makes it look, it's just a little bit harder to see, okay? So what I'm gonna suggest for you is that you turn your matte layers on and determine the timings looking at this, which I think is much easier, okay? And here's my little trick for building in pauses, all right? So once you feel like this is the right length here, and these are linear still, okay? I would go through this and figure out the closest point to where you want the pauses to be. Like I want a pause to be right here when this E reaches this peak, okay? So somewhere between these two frames. So what I gotta do is make a keyframe here just by pressing this button, okay? So this is still just along this path. I just have made a keyframe here along my end trim path animation. It's not really changing anything, okay? But right here also, somewhere between here and here, I want another keyframe because I want to pause there, right? So what I'm gonna do is go ahead and make another keyframe here by pressing this button, okay? And again, right now nothing's changed. It still looks the exact same way, okay? But I've indicated for myself where I want these pauses to be. Now, one other thing here is that what we could do is use the trim path's end to kind of dial this back a little and get this just to the point where I want the pause to be, okay? And I think that's right about here, okay? When the E reaches this point right there, okay? So I've changed this a little bit, and I'm gonna do the same for this. Now, this really isn't gonna make the overall timings look that different. It's a very slight adjustment. Yeah, so I'm gonna put that there, just like that, okay? Now, what this means now is this, again, this looks the same now pretty much, but now I can take all of these, and I'm gonna press F9, boop, and put some E's on there now. So now check this out. Right? It's starting to look pretty close to what we want, okay? But now I could take these keyframes and pull them into the graph editor and just make some small adjustments that will help this along, okay? So what do I wanna do? Well, let me get in a little closer here. What I want is to pull these pauses a little bit more so that they're a little bit more noticeable, but I really don't want to like crank this the whole way because it'll really exaggerate the handwriting and it just won't look real, okay? So I'm just gonna pull this like a little bit. I just want a little bit more of a pause there and a little bit more of a pause there. And at the end, I guess I can have a little bit of a pause too, so it kind of just glides in. So let's just look at like that difference. So right there, you can see that that helps a little bit. Right? And what we could also do if we wanted is try to pull these a little bit this way to see if that extends the pause and does anything interesting. And just a little bit though. And also at the beginning, I think this would want to start like kind of faster. So let's look at that. Yeah. It looks pretty good. Like you could definitely feel those pauses now. And this is definitely also the point at which, you know, if you want, for example, if you think this T is moving a little bit too fast here at the end, give it another frame and see how that feels. Yeah, and that might be nicer to give it a little bit more of a definite like ending or whatever, okay? This is a really important step. And what I would say is definitely do this before you add any of the masks on and definitely before you animate any of the masks, okay? Because if you change these timings for whatever reason and you already have the masks animated, you'd have to change all that mask animation and it could get really annoying. So just one more thing, and this might be for the designers out there more than anybody else, but it could also go for anybody else who's feeling a little extra awesome today. The final thing is that you can customize this project a little more. Now, I only want you to do this if you've already animated that script logo, okay? That is the main task here and everybody has to do it. But if you're done with that and you really want to continue being creative, yeah, feel free to get your inner designer on. Here's a couple of things that you can do. First of all, up here in this folder, you see that I've given you a bunch of photos, and I should say that I made these in Midjourney, okay? Sorry, if you're a professional illustrator or designer, that might offend you, and I totally understand that offense. I only did it this way because I needed to be able to distribute photos that I had the rights for that were of very specific things, and I thought, for educational purposes, I'm gonna use this, and I think it's okay, all right? So don't be mad at me. In a professional setting, I would of course always want to pay an illustrator or a designer for their work. Anyway, I do have a bunch of different Midjourney illustrations in here that I made, okay? And they're all of things that I think are awesome, okay? Bouquets of flowers, candy, a classic car, various ice creams, okay, and also this image of puppies. So for example, I don't think I've showed you this. If you would like to switch out, for example, this photo, the bouquet, with, I don't know, one of these other ones, just say like this classic car or whatever, okay? With this selected in my timeline, okay, I could take this and if I hold down on Option and I move it on top of this, I will replace the bouquet with the car like this, boop. Okay, Option drag is really, really useful for switching between, in this case, one photo and another. Now this works really well in this case, I should say, because all of these images that I made in Midjourney are the same size. They're all 4096 by 4096. So it's very helpful when you do the option drag thing that they're all the same size because it swaps in like really easily, okay? I'm gonna put that back to the way it was, but you could definitely go through and choose other photos to fill in here. You could have, for example, the whole thing be about ice cream if you think that ice cream is awesome, like I do, okay? So another thing you could do here is change the color of this, right? To whatever you want, something different, or you could take the color out. I don't know, make that look awesome the way that you see it, and definitely extra, okay? Another thing that you could do is you could sort of customize the colors of these photos. So here, you could, for example, just this photo. Now, I know I've showed you only one effect, but if you're a designer and you go into these color correction effects, you'll see a bunch of ones that are pretty familiar to you from Photoshop, I would imagine. So like hue and saturation, right? If you select your layer and put on an effect, color correction, and hue and saturation, right? Up here in your effect control window, you'll see this hue saturation, which is a lot like what you have in Photoshop, for example. So you could always like colorize this and make this outrageously saturated and then change, I don't know, the hue or whatever to something crazy like that. I'm gonna hit reset because that's crazy looking, but you could also just like change the master hue here. Maybe that's not the way to go, but you could also do like color correction, levels, if you want to change the black and white values, or you could choose curves, which I love, which allows you to like kind of crank up. For example, like if you want to make this more blue in the background here, you can kind of crank up the blue in this shot, right? So you can do all sorts of color correct effects there if you feel comfortable with that. You could even bring in your own photos and substitute them for these. I would just make sure, one, they are quite big, okay? Because these photos, like I said, are 4096 by 4096. The other thing is you definitely want to make sure that they are totally awesome. Right on, so that's it for today. I just want you to have fun with this and be creative. And really, I can't wait to see all the awesome things you're gonna do with this project. Thank you and bye.
What happens now?